If you're starting an AI visibility project for you or for a client, before you write a sentence of new content, the first thing you should do is audit your site to see what things out there might be preventing you from ranking at all. This AI readiness audit here allows you to check individual pages against 7 different dimensions and shows you exactly where there might be problems that are causing you to be excluded from AI search results and tells you how to fix them. So you can search for individual pages by the intent of the page. You can do paths and wildcards here. If you have a save set, you can run those over and over again. So you can save a whole bunch of pages here and just rerun them as audits as you make changes. But for now, let's take a look at 3 pages in a pretty popular website, Airbnb, probably a brand that most people are familiar with. This will give us a sense of how even a big brand looks to AI. We're going to start the audit. It's going to run out and it's going to, for each page that we've added, it's going to do 7 different checks against AI criteria that would cause you potentially to fail to be cited. It takes a couple of minutes, depending on how many pages that are out there. As you can see, static content, we'll talk about that in a bit, performance, whether or not there's structured data, Google's EEAT rankings, readability, whether the page is optimized for citation, and accessibility. So as soon as this finishes, we'll take a look at these pages here and we'll figure out how Airbnb is doing. And when it's done, you get an overall score. Any critical issues are identified, scores by the criteria we run, and then scores also by homepage. Let's take a look at the individual pages here, though. As you can see, the homepage doesn't really score that well, which is, for a big brand is interesting. A couple of things that, so we look at the metrics here. Static content, we'll talk about this. Most of that content's rendered dynamically. Its performance is decent. It's got most of the structured data we'd expect. We did find some issues with EEAT. Important note here that no company has access to Google's actual EEAT algorithm. What we have is a series of about 14 checks that we run that we know are factors, but also that influence AI. Readability, if your content isn't written at a grade level that AI likes to use, it's likely to be rewritten. We don't check this for homepage and for product pages because those are usually not written in the same style. But for anything that's an article, a blog post, or support, we'll check for readability. Citation worthiness, we'll take a look at that in detail. We actually look and try to figure out what are the best possible citation chunks out of a website. And we do a lightweight accessibility check, again, focused just on things that influence AI. It's not a full accessibility audit. Well, let's take a look. So first thing we do, we take the homepage in this case, and we look at it as AI sees it here on the left without JavaScript, and how a human would see it. As you can see, none of this content is showing up for AI. It's all rendered dynamically through JavaScript. So when AI cites it, this is all invisible to them. They see nothing. Very different than what humans do. For Airbnb, this might not be a problem. They're doubtful that we're at a point where ChatGPT is trying to book at Airbnb. But for the rest of us who are trying to make sure that our content is visible to AI, is a big deal. Metrics, you can see the time to first byte was actually pretty low. It took 1.2 seconds or so to transfer all the HTML, and it's about 500 kilobytes, which is about half a meg. Important thing here, if this is over 2 megabytes, we will flag it because Googlebot has just announced that they will stop fetching content after 2 meg. So if your pages are too long, not even Google will be able to see it all. It's a huge deal. So we also tokenize your page. Tokens are the kind of unit of measure for AI. They're roughly equivalent to a syllable. As you can see, the static tokens, the ones that we get when we just look at it without JavaScript, relatively small. The tokens that we get when the page is actually rendered as a human would see it are much higher. So a content ratio should be close to 100 to make sure that the content that AI sees is exactly what a human sees. We count the words, and then grounding coverage will actually give you show how that comes through. So the I'm going to actually change here, and we're going to look at a different page. So down here, here's your screenshots. In this case, pretty close, right? This page is, somewhat static. These are stays in Dallas, so this page could likely is server side rendered. Metrics again, pretty good there. Findings here. So we look for these criteria here: freshness. The page has dates, but the JSON LD that they put in there, the schema markup, doesn't have matching dates. We check to make sure that the dates that are in the JSON are the same as the dates that are on the page. If they're not, that can be confusing to AI. Chunk quality, we're going to take a look at this here when we go over to our chunk analysis. So what this does is it takes the entire page, converts it to Markdown, which is how an AI crawler would end up evaluating it. And we look at where the best chunk is. So if we look down here, in this case, the chunk of the content that matches the intent of the page is pretty far down the page, but as you can see, it's kind of partial. So this has the best information that AI would use to evaluate this page, but it doesn't really do a good job of representing the page as a whole. Other thing that we look at are what's called structural deserts. So this is one of the properties here. This is the description that they've written in here. Relatively long, which is nice. Humans want to see a lot of content here. But what happens is AI processes the page in 128 token chunks. So it takes pieces of the page and it ingests them in sequence to try and understand the content on the page. You can actually see these chunks, these windows here. We mark them as green or red depending on how closely they align to a sentence boundary. So when an AI looks at the page and they get just this piece here, there's really nothing that it can establish here. It has no connection to any other part of the page. It has no heading included. So this is essentially incomprehensible to an AI. That's why, because this is in part contained entirely within this longer text, we consider it a structural desert. It has no anchor anywhere. So the first thing you'd want to do here is probably rewrite this. For AI, you might want to put some of this stuff more in bullets, or potentially even subhead this out. If you're Airbnb, you might want to take this and put it in a little more structured data. That's why we give this a relatively low chunk quality score. On the help page, see here, pretty close, not too much different. Metrics all look pretty good. Our chunk analysis here, the best chunk was identified as the first part of the page. That's pretty good. So since the page is about how to search for listings, the content has that in the heading. That's a pretty good example. And in this case, there are no structural deserts. The windows are relatively aligned. So this isn't terribly bad, even though it scores relatively medium on that front. But you can see this content has no structured data. And if we take a look at the findings over here, the token breaks are mid-sentence. That's why it scores a little low there. Citation readiness, there's no source, there's no freshness, but all of these parts are green. Performance, the HTML size is a little above average. EEAT singles, we're treating this as a piece of written content, so there's no author. In the case of a help document, there might not be, but you might still want to put an author in there to assign it to the company. There's no date information on this. Couple of accessibility things. There's no main element here. AI uses the main element to identify what the primary piece of content is that it should be analyzing. Always helpful to give it a good signal here. And then readability, grounding, and static content are all fine. So all of this goes into a report. These are exportable. Um, you can open the shareable version and share this with a client. These are publicly shareable. If you pull this here, you can send them to social media, post them in a private Slack or Discord or Teams, copy a link. These are all shareable here. Individual pages are also reviewable as their own links. So if you want to go ahead and give you want to go ahead and send somebody a link directly to a page, they can see exactly what you're seeing. You can also export these as CSV, and you'll be able to export them to PDF and PowerPoint just like our other reports, so that you can work them into a client presentation or a pitch. This becomes your immediate punch list. Don't bother writing any new content until these numbers all look pretty good.